January 18, 1943. The 67th Army of the Leningrad Front and the 2nd Shock Army of the Volkhov Front linked up near Workers' Settlement No. 1, punching a land corridor to Leningrad for the first time in nearly 500 days. On that same day, a few kilometers away near Workers' Settlement No. 5, a 56-ton machine sank into the peat bog up to its tracks, and the Soviet army had no gun that could kill it from the front. 5 machines at 6 tons each, 1 tank at 56. The cables held. How do you tow 56 tons when your heaviest machines weigh 6? The 61st Tank Brigade answered with 5 T-60 light tanks hooked in tandem, all at once, all pulling the same direction, and it worked. The Tiger's turret number was 100, 1st Company, 502nd Heavy Tank Battalion. It had left the trail and buried itself in the peaty slush. Black bog water around the tracks. January cold, holding the ground half frozen, half liquid. The kind of terrain that swallows 56 tons without effort. The crew moved for the demolition charges. They had time to place them. Then Soviet infantry reached the hole. A hatch opened. Soldiers pulled themselves up and inside. The German crew came out the same way the charges went in. Through the hatch, by hand, into the snow. Not a trained assault, not a suppression operation. Just men who climbed into a tank they couldn't shoot through, grabbed the crew, and threw them out. The Germans sent a deblocking force, 3-axle trucks, moving fast. Soviet anti-tank guns were already waiting. Several trucks were knocked out before anyone got close. The attempt failed. Then came the T-60s. 6.4 tons each. They hooked cables to the hull of a 56-ton machine their own guns couldn't dent, their own armor couldn't survive against. One Tiger weighed as much as 9 of them. Each crew in that line knew it. They hooked the cables anyway. The transmission was in neutral. The Tiger moved. A KV-1 pulled it the rest of the way to the rear. The second Tiger, turret number 121, came into Soviet hands a few days later in the same sector. By April 1943, both machines sat at the NIBT testing ground in Kubinka. The turret came off. One shot. Not a penetration. The armor held. The shockwave hit the ring mount and 11 tons of steel slid sideways off the hull. By April 1943, both captured Tigers, turret numbers 100 and 121, were anchored at the NIBT testing ground in Kubinka. The Soviets had spent weeks on this, working through the arsenal, caliber by caliber, system by system, trying to find something that worked. The 76mm gun went first. Every production T-34 carried one, every KV. Hundreds of tanks across the entire Soviet armor force. Same armament, same problem. Point blank, maximum angle, didn't matter. The Tiger's frontal plate turned every round at any distance. The 85mm anti-aircraft gun worked. The 122mm hull gun worked. But both were towed weapons, fixed to the ground, dependent on tractors and crew time to move. Against a Tiger in motion, they were irrelevant. Soviet intelligence already knew what summer was bringing. A major Wehrmacht offensive at the Kursk Bulge. Tigers at the tip of it. The Red Army had no answer. Not one production vehicle capable of killing a Tiger in a direct frontal engagement. The 152mm shell didn't penetrate the armor. It just removed an 11-ton turret from the hull. Penetrating the armor turned out to be unnecessary. The ML-20 crew trained the howitzer on the Tiger's turret and fired a standard high-explosive fragmentation round, the kind designed for bunkers and fortified positions, not tanks. The round hit. The shockwave transferred through the steel into the ring mount. The mount failed. 11 tons shifted off the hull and came to rest on its side in the dirt. 11 tons, roughly the combined weight of 2 fully loaded T-60 tanks. One shell moved it. The testers walked up. The turret lay on the range ground, surrounded by hundreds of craters from everything else fired that spring. Craters that had done nothing. This was different. At the time of that shot, the ML-20 was already mounted on a production self-propelled chassis. Kubinka, in the spring of 1943, gave an answer. 3 months later, in July, 24 machines carrying that same answer arrived at Kursk. A howitzer, a high-explosive shell, no armor-piercing round. What happened next turned a temporary fix into a name. Why is Zveroboy the SU-152 and not the ISU-152, which fought longer and in far greater numbers? Battle gives names, factories don't. A 152mm high-explosive shell doesn't need to pierce Tiger armor. It detonates on the surface and pushes blast energy into the entire turret. 11 tons of cast steel sitting on a circular ring. At close range, that shock breaks the mounting. The turret shifts. Sometimes it comes off. The tank stops being a tank. No armor-piercing round required. A bunker-busting howitzer on a chassis the Red Army already wanted to retire. Those 24 SU-152s ran on a KV-1 hull, obsolete at the time of production. Built in 25 days, armed with nothing designed to kill tanks. Over 10 days of fighting on the Kursk salient in the summer of 1943, they killed enough tigers and panthers that crews gave them a name. Zveroboy, Animal Hunter. It stuck. It became an official honorary designation. Not a nickname, not folklore, an official name. The ISU-152 came later with a better hull, the same gun, and around 4,600 machines produced against 670 SU-152s. The ISU-152 outlasted everything. It fought to the end. In common use, the name traveled with the type, but the official designation stayed where it started. 3 months after Kubinka, 24 machines with howitzers and no anti-tank ammunition walked into the largest tank battle of the Second World War, and they worked well enough to earn it. The official name went to the SU-152, 670 machines, not the ISU. The Kubinka tests settled the technical side, but the need behind them went back further, much further. Winter 1939 to 1940. The Red Army reached the Mannerheim Line in Finland and stopped. Concrete bunkers, buried firing points, no way to destroy them at close range under armor. Joseph Kotin, chief designer at the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant, took note. An attempt at a solution already existed. The KV-2 mounted a 152mm M10 howitzer in a massive rotating turret. On paper, exactly right. In practice, a disaster. The turret rose as high as a 2-story house. Any observer could pick it out from kilometers away. The manual drive barely turned it. Put the tank on a slight incline, it threatened to flip. Fewer than 350 KV-2s ever came off the line. KV-2 was built for exactly what the infantry needed under Stalingrad. By fall of 1942, nobody built them anymore. The Kirov plant left Leningrad for Chelyabinsk in October 1941. Production stopped during the evacuation. Nobody planned to restart it. Fall 1942, Operation Uranus. Soviet forces pushed toward Stalingrad. Infantry moved forward. Towed howitzers didn't. Not enough tractors. Roads turned to mud. Gun crews worked in the open, no armor, no cover. The infantry reached the fortified lines alone. The howitzers were still somewhere behind. Still stuck. The answer had existed since 1940. They left it behind. By December 1942, 3 separate design bureaus put their projects on the table. The same problem they couldn't crack in Finland. 3 teams, no coordination between them. December 1942. 3 design bureaus, 3 projects. The same gun in every proposal. The 152mm ML-20. The same chassis, the KV-1S. A straightforward competition. It wasn't. Why did Petrov's project, technically the strongest on the table, lose? 48 tons against parts from a working assembly line. In January 1943, the Soviet Union had no time for the superior option. Fyodor Fyodorovich Petrov led the design bureau at Plant No. 9 in Sverdlovsk. His Zik-20 was a serious machine. The main artillery directorate reviewed it and found 2 problems. The gun was too complicated to produce quickly, and the vehicle weighed close to 48 tons, beyond what the existing factory base could handle under wartime pressure. Lev Sergeyevich Troyanov at SKB-2 in Chelyabinsk offered something different. Not the most capable design, the most buildable one. His project used components already moving through the assembly lines at the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant. No new tooling, no retooled supply chains, just assembly. The GAU chose Troyanov. On January 4, 1943, Stalin signed GKO Decree No. 2692. 17 days had passed since the December projects reached the main artillery directorate. That same month, Soviet forces had captured a Tiger tank near Leningrad. A machine designed to counter it cleared production approval before engineers completed their first full technical assessment of the captured vehicle. 21 days after the decree, the prototype fired its first shot. January 4, 1943, the GKO Decree. 4 days later, working drawings reached the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant workshops. The clock started running. It did not stop. The armor plates came from across one factory yard. The same CHKZ complex that pressed them shipped them straight to the assembly floor. They arrived. Workers laid them onto the KV-1 hull the same day. No storage, no delay. That was Object 236's construction logic, everything already inside the building. First week, engineers built an armor model and a full-scale mock-up of the fighting compartment. At the same time, Petrov's bureau in Motovelika, on the outskirts of Perm, adapted the ML-20 howitzer for a self-propelled mount. Petrov kept the gun assembly intact. He moved several control levers to give the gunner working room in a space barely large enough to stand. That was the full extent of the redesign. Second week, armor plates arrived and installation began the same afternoon. 3 shifts, no rotation home. The workers who had built KV-1 holes on that same floor now built the machine the KV-1 could not become. Foremen stopped distinguishing between construction crews and design engineers. Both stood at the line. The Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant, Tankograd the workers called it, had absorbed evacuated factories from Leningrad and Kharkov since 1941. By 1943, it built nothing fundamentally new. It built faster from what it already had. January 24th, Object 236 stood complete. 20 days from the GKO resolution to a finished prototype of a heavy self-propelled gun. A class of vehicle that under normal conditions required months of design iteration. The engineering solution contained nothing experimental. A production ML-20 howitzer, unmodified, with a handful of repositioned levers set inside the hull of a serial KV-1. One shell, close to 50 kilograms. The loader picked it up by hand, in a compartment barely wide enough to turn around in. How many times per minute could the crew fire? 1.5. 40 seconds between rounds. The exact window a German gunner needed to correct his aim and come back around. The loader had no mechanical assist, no rammer, no hoist. Just his arms, his back, and a round that weighed as much as a grown man's torso. He did this 20 times per engagement, at most. 20 rounds was everything the SU-152 carried into a fight. The fuel tank sat in the fighting compartment, not separated by an armor plate. Not behind a firewall, directly beside the crew, close enough that the smell of diesel soaked into uniforms, equipment, hands. If a shell pierced the hull side, the fuel caught. Everything else followed. The periscopic observation devices left wide blind spots around the vehicle. Frontline reports came back with the same detail again and again. Threats appearing from angles the crew couldn't cover. No machine gun filled those gaps. The designers had planned for the SU-152 to work behind infantry lines, with protection on all sides. In practice, the infantry wasn't always there. The frontal armor ran to 75 millimeters, enough against a medium anti-tank gun, not enough against the 88 millimeter cannon of a Tiger at distance, or the 75 millimeter gun of a Panzer IV at medium range. The SU-152 could kill both vehicles with a single hit. But that required getting the shot off first. 20 rounds, 40 seconds each. The man hauling that shell was working with a gun designed 33 years before the Tiger existed. That's not a footnote. That's the whole story. On paper, a fundamentally new heavy self-propelled gun. In reality, the KV-1 chassis, unchanged, running gear intact, transmission untouched. The ML-20 from Petrov's bureau in Perm. 25 days from blank page to prototype. No new design, no new components. The ML-20 traced back to 1910. The French firm Schneider built a 152mm siege gun for the Russian Imperial Army, at a time when no one had built a working tank yet. 3 decades of refinement later, it was one of the best heavy artillery systems of the war. Proven, established. Moving it to a self-propelled chassis changed almost nothing. The KV-1 chassis followed the same logic. Running gear, untouched. Transmission, untouched. The turret came off. The ML-20's barrel length made a rotating mount physically impossible anyway. A low-welded superstructure replaced it. Height dropped to 2 meters 30 centimeters. The KV-2's fatal silhouette solved in a single redesign. 1 unit, 265,000 rubles. February 14, 1943. The State Defense Committee signed the decree. Serial production began. The decree named a number, 30 vehicles in February. Chelyabinsk sent 15. The other 15 simply didn't exist. How did they fix incorrectly drilled holes in machines that had already cleared military acceptance? With gas cutters. At the Moscow Self-Propelled Artillery Center, after Sharonov had already signed. That's what serial production looked like from the inside. The Chelyabinsk tractor plant ran 3 separate assembly lines at once. The T-34, the KV-1, and the SU-152. No Allied factory attempted anything close to it. Workers weren't slow. Parts were missing. March brought a corrected plan. 90 machines total. 75 for the month, plus 15 carried over from February. By March 28th, military acceptance had cleared 23. The line had stalled. No track links. Then the last 3 days of March arrived. 67 machines. 3 days. Historian Yuri Pashalok documented this as standard Chelyabinsk practice. The end of the month comes, every available part gets used. The plant closes the numbers on paper. April changed the bottleneck, guns this time, and wiring for the Luke lighting system. 31 machines cleared by the 24th. May nearly stopped everything. 3 weeks of production yielded 5 self-propelled guns. Plant number 200 had shipped only 28 holes. Without holes, the line didn't move. Military Commissioner Sharonov kept signing. Machines came through with defects in the gun's recoil mechanism. The factory had drilled the hydraulic fluid refill holes in the wrong position. Topping up the fluid was impossible. Workers at the Moscow Self-Propelled Artillery Center found the problem and opened the holes with gas cutters on machines that had already passed acceptance. Several dozen machines cleared Sharonov's desk with that defect on record. By May 1943, those machines were heading east. The first SU-152s reached the newly formed regiments of the High Command Reserve, and one of them went to Guards Major Sankovsky. His unit, the 1,500th Heavy Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment. 12 vehicles, 3 batteries of 4, 1 KV-1 tank as the command vehicle. Nothing else. The 1,500th transferred to the northern face of the Kursk salient. A column of 12 SU-152s on the march spans the width of a single city street, curb to curb. That was the entire regiment in one line. They arrived before the Germans moved. Not long before, but enough to dig in. On July 5, 1943, Germany launched Operation Citadel. More than 900 German tanks pushed into the salient. 24 SU-152s covered the entire Kursk Bulge, north and south faces combined. That's it. 24. The 1,500th received reinforcements during the fighting and expanded to 21 vehicles. Replacements rushed forward as the battle widened, still a fraction of what faced them. 10 days after entering battle, those 12 machines would earn a nickname that outlived every one of them. On July 8, 1943, The 1,500th Heavy Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment moved into action. Sankovsky's regiment had no armor-piercing shells. Zero. Every breech loaded with high-explosive rounds only. What happened next, no one designed for. The shell was 43 kilograms, 152 millimeters. When it hit a Tiger's armor plate, the plate didn't crack. The shell didn't go through. None of that. In a fraction of a second, the full weight of the projectile transferred its energy into the steel. The shockwave moved through solid metal. On the other side of that wall, the inside of the tank, fragments of the inner surface tore free, red hot. The crew never saw them. Why didn't the armor stop it? Because the Spall effect works from the inside out. The wave enters from the hit side. The killing happens on the opposite side. The Tiger's crew wasn't struck by something that passed through the wall. They were struck by the wall itself. Inside the tank, the crew heard it differently. Not an explosion outside. A deep concussive thud, as if the vehicle had been punched by something enormous. Then the turret traverse handle stopped moving. The ring track jammed. No bolts held the Tiger's 11-ton turret in place, only the track and gravity. Sometimes the turret shifted off the hull and dropped to the ground. At 1.5 to 2 kilometers, the SU-152 produced this result consistently. In the summer of 1943, no other Soviet armored vehicle could. Sankovsky personally destroyed 10 German tanks from his own vehicle in a single engagement. He received the title Hero of the Soviet Union. The regiment filed its 10-day report: 7 Tigers, 39 medium tanks, 11 self-propelled guns. 57 claimed kills, July 8th to the 18th. 24 SU-152s operated across the entire Kursk salient. In Operation Citadel, the Germans deployed over 900 armored vehicles. 1 SU-152 for every 37 German machines. The regiment's results triggered a formal designation. Soviet command named the SU-152 Zveroboy, Beast Killer. It was the first and only time in the war that Soviet command assigned an honorary name to a specific model of armored vehicle for the results of a single battle. Sankovsky received the Hero of the Soviet Union. The 1,500th got its nickname. Then Yuri Pashaluk opened the TSE-MO files, the central archive of the Ministry of Defense, and the numbers stopped adding up. Pashaluk worked with primary documents, not post-war memoirs, not propaganda publications, the original reports. What he found wasn't a fabrication. It was something more ordinary and more persistent. A chain. The chain starts at the front line. A crew commander writes his report in the heat of battle. Smoke on the horizon. Distance of 1.5 kilometers. A large silhouette. He writes the word Ferdinand. It goes into the document. The document goes up the chain. Step 2. A war correspondent arrives at the regiment. He takes the figures from the reports. No cross-referencing. Nothing to cross-reference against. The figures go into the dispatch. Step 3. Post-war publications cite the dispatches. The dispatches cited the reports. The reports cited smoke and distance. 3 generations of texts. One word: Ferdinand. There were 89 Ferdinands at Operation Citadel. Every single one of them operated on the northern face of the salient, exclusively in the sector of Model's 9th Army. They never came within range of Sankovsky's group. Not one. The 7 Tigers in the regiment's report raised the same question. Only 1 Tiger was documented as lost in that sector, hit by an 85mm shell on the side. Not a 152mm round. Not the SU-152 at all. This is what Schertzen looked like from a moving crew compartment at 1,500 meters in July dust. A flat steel plate bolted to the hull sides of a Panzer IV. In motion, in smoke, those plates broke the tank's silhouette. The outline read wider and heavier. It looked like something with thicker armor, something in a different weight class. The crews wrote down what they saw. They wrote, heavy tank. Schertzen were a German anti-infantry measure. Thin steel screens designed to detonate shaped charges before they reached the main hull. Against a 152mm round, they offered nothing. But they changed the silhouette, and in the summer of 1943, silhouette was the only identification tool a crew had. The 1,500th Regiment almost certainly destroyed medium-class vehicles, Panzer IVs and similar machines with side screens bolted on, and reported them as heavies. This wasn't deception. The Americans overstated their air kill counts. The Germans overstated their armor kills on the Eastern Front. Every army fighting in that war inflated enemy equipment class under the same conditions: smoke, distance, speed, fear. But for Zveroboy, this gap between report and reality carries more weight than it does for most weapons, because the name came directly from those reports. Beast Killer. The beasts the SU-152 actually killed near Kursk were predominantly medium tanks with bolt-on sheet metal. The second discrepancy hasn't been resolved. One object survived everything the SU-152 went through. Not the hull, not the armor, the gun. It still stands at Kubinka, on the same firing range where in the spring of 1943, an ML-20 shell tore the turret off a captured Tiger. How much weaponry from 1943 made it to a war in 2001? The ML-20 did, and it fired. The gun's origins had nothing to do with the Soviet Union. French engineers at Schneider designed it on commission from the Tsarist army, a siege howitzer for a regime that wouldn't survive the next decade. That contract kept traveling forward. Through 2 revolutions, 2 world wars, decades of Cold War. Spring 1943, Kubinka. The Tiger sat on the test grounds, still bearing the marks of the cables that dragged it there. The commission gathered at a safe distance. The ML-20 loaded a 152mm high-explosive shell. 1 round. The shell struck. The turret sheared clean at the weld seam, rotated, and dropped several meters from where it had started. The commission signed the protocol that same day. That test sealed the SU-152's production fate. 10 months on the assembly line. That was the machine's entire run. The gun had a different timeline. In 2001, towed ML-20s rolled through the Afghan mountains in the hands of Northern Alliance fighters targeting Taliban positions. Same caliber, same lineage, different century. 4 SU-152s have survived to the present. One stands at Kubinka on the open platform, its barrel aimed at roughly the same patch of ground where the Tiger sat in 1943. The machine ran for 10 months. The gun ran for 91 years. 91 years from Schneider's first blueprints to the last salvos in Afghanistan. 20 shells, 90 seconds between each one. That was the arithmetic inside an SU-152 in the summer of 1943. At Kubinka, 1 round had stripped a Tiger's turret clean. Out on the fields around Kursk, the same gun was running a different calculation. 1 crew, 1 Ferdinand in the sights. The shell connected. The blast spread sideways. The Ferdinand had no turret to blow off. Its hull sat low and heavy, and the explosion scattered around it. The crew inside took the concussion. Some didn't survive, but the vehicle held. German records were clear. Of all the Ferdinands hit at Kursk, only 1 was completely destroyed. The rest pulled out after dark. New crews replaced the casualties. The machines went back to the line. Soviet commanders moved fast. They ordered crews to keep firing at immobilized targets until nothing remained to recover. Not damaged, not burning, gone. But the order said more than it was supposed to. 3 hits to finish a Ferdinand meant 15% of everything on board, for 1 target. 2 engagements like that and the racks were nearly empty. 3 and an SU-152 was heading back with nothing left to fire. The crew knew the count. They ran it through every engagement. The Soviet order to keep firing was written confirmation. 1 shell was never enough. The ammo racks told half the story. The other half was underneath the hull. Why didn't the KV-1 hold up? Not because it was a bad tank, because Tankograd drove it 3 shifts around the clock, and the front gave it nothing back. No maintenance intervals, no depot rotations, no spare parts. The KV-1 drivetrain had limits. Engineers designed it around managed upkeep, scheduled replacements, service cycles. Workers at Chelyabinsk slept on the factory floor between shifts. Machines rolled straight off the production line into combat. No pause. By early 1943, the grinding started. Metal scraping inside the transmission housings. Not incoming fire, but the platform consuming itself. Engines failed between engagements. Transmissions seized on the march. Some SU-152s never reached a German position. They just stopped. Combat losses didn't halt production. The chassis did. It wasn't destroyed. It fell apart on its own. By December 1943, the Chelyabinsk conveyor stopped, 10 months after it started. Around 670 machines total. Parts dried up. The KV-1 had nothing left. The ML-20S came off the KV-1 frame and mounted onto the IS heavy tank chassis. The IS could take what the KV-1 couldn't. The new machine was the SU-152. Chelyabinsk built over 4,000 of them before the war ended. The 670 SU-152s that rolled off the Chelyabinsk line were already fighting. The line was gone. The machines weren't. Fall of 1943, the Mias Front. Spring of 1944, Simferopol. The same hull, the same gun, the same cramped crew positions, moving west. Summer of 1944, Operation Bagration. The largest Soviet offensive of the war, and here, finally, the SU-152 did what it was originally built to do. Not hunt tigers, crack German fortifications, break open prepared defense lines. The mission written into the requirements back in January of 1943. It took a year and a half to actually use the machine for it. By then, the SU-152 had arrived. Both machines fought in the same assault formations, same nickname. The old hull and the new one, side by side. A few SU-152s lasted through to the Baltic Front, into East Prussia. Single vehicles by that point, worn suspensions, borrowed parts. After the war, surviving hulls left Soviet service. Some were transferred abroad. Egyptian SU-152s fought in the Six-Day War in 1967, 24 years after Kursk. The same boxy silhouette, the same long barrel, now with Arabic markings stenciled across the side. Sand packed into every gap in the vision blocks. The same armor plates welded together in Chelyabinsk in the frozen winter of '43, baking under the Sinai sun. Around it on the position, Soviet-built T-54s and T-55s. Modern steel. The SU-152 was a relic by every technical measure. It showed up anyway. The SU-152 went further. Berlin, 1945. Soviet service through the 1970s. 1,885 built before the war ended. Over 3,000 total before production closed. Same gun, stronger chassis, more room inside. In 1986, ISU-152s drove into the Chernobyl exclusion zone. 43 years after Kotin and Troyanov assembled the first prototype in the Tankograd workshops. Both machines, the one that reached Berlin and the one the Egyptians took to Sinai, started from the same decision. One hull, one barrel, 3 men who didn't wait. Kotin, Petrov, Troyanov. 20 days. What matters more, the best machine or the machine on time? The summer of 1943 answered. Kotin looked at the KV-1. The assembly line had months left before shutdown. The tooling was already there. Spare parts filled the shelves. Workers knew every weld point by hand. He didn't order new drawings. He took the hull already in production. Petrov looked at the ML-20. The factory at Motovelika had been building it since 1937. 6 years by the time Petrov reached for it. Workers had memorized every tolerance. The jigs hadn't moved in years. He didn't design a new gun. He took the one the factory already knew how to build. Troyanov's contribution looked simple from the outside. He added nothing. Not one bracket. Not one extra node. 20 days, maximum pressure, minimum complexity. That kind of restraint is its own discipline. The machine had real problems. 20 rounds in the ammunition load, fuel tanks inside the fighting compartment, blind spots in the periscopes, a chassis eating through its service life. They knew all of it. They shipped it anyway. The Tiger I carried 100 millimeters of frontal armor. Standard Soviet anti-tank shells bounced. The ML-20 high-explosive shell couldn't punch through either. It didn't need to. When the 43-kilogram shell struck the Tiger's hull, the sound was wrong. Not the sharp crack of a penetrating round, a dull, flat blow, and then the pressure wave moved through the steel. Inside, welds cracked along their seams, brackets tore loose. The crew was dead before the round stopped moving. The Wehrmacht had calculated for armor thickness. Nobody calculated for that. Frontline soldiers called it the Zveroboy, beast killer. Not because it was the most sophisticated machine at Kursk, because it worked when nothing else did. The SU-152 served a year and a half on the front. Its successor, the SU-152, carried the same logic all the way to Berlin in 1945. Same hull lineage, same howitzer ancestry, no new chassis, no wasted time. One summer was enough.